Hi, I'm Louise Cutting from Cutting Line Designs. I'm going to show you how to do flat piping insertion today. This particular vest is from the pattern Artist in Motion. Now don't get afraid because of the width of it. It is a one-size-fits-all. On the body, something like this will hang close, as you saw in the still black and red and white one. It will hang this way and it'll drape into soft folds, and it covers up lots of bad stuff. So there's nothing wrong with the design. I just saw in the black and white and red one that it needed an extra spark, and it was that black streak that was running through the middle that kind of separated the two but tied them together. And I'm going to show you how to do flat insertion piping. Here is the pattern. Now I'm using an artist proof because I can work on it if it isn't going to work out. I'm not cutting up a good pattern. But I wanted to be below the buttonhole and the button. So I drew a line perpendicular to center front and center back all the way across on the same level. And I'm going to cut those, and I have to add seam allowance because they're going to have to be sewn back together. I'm going to show you what I use to lengthen, shorten, add. I use graph paper. This particular one is a 1/4 inch, but you can also get them in 1/8 inch graph paper, and that's what these are. And it's a lightweight vellum. You can also get them as tracing paper, and you'll find them in your office supply stores, but it makes life a whole lot easier. Instead of constantly measuring, that you have a nice little grid to work with. So I've now separated my bottom from my top. We have to add seam allowance, so I used my graph paper. I've given a little bit that I can tuck under, and I've added a 5/8 inch seam allowance. And I'll do that to both the bottom and the top. Let's flip this guy around. And these will be scotch taped in place. And that will be your new pattern piece. So it will be the bottom, including the 5/8. It'll be the top, including the 5/8. And now you'll be able to stitch it together. But we also have to get our piping. Now I've placed my graph paper under. Here's my 5/8. It's been stuck under about 3/8 of an inch. Same thing on the bottom. This is now will become my seam allowance. And these will be scotch taped in place. The next garment you're making, you don't want that. This can just be married back together using tape. Now, what we're trying to do is the flat insertion of piping. The piping is going to be 3/8 of an inch wide. So what we need is, let me bringing this in again right side up. What we need is a 5/8 inch seam, a 3/8 inch seam, a 3/8 inch seam, and a 5/8 inch seam. Here's our fold line. So when this gets folded in half, just this little section is going to be sticking out. But it's a lot easier to have the width of your seam allowance here the same width as here, so when on the back side they'll all line up together when you stitch them. So I want to show you how to pin, where to pin. Now here is the flat piping in its full width. It ended up being 2 inches wide. We have our 5/8 inch seam allowance, our 5/8 inch seam allowance, and 2 3/8 inch of the piping that'll be exposed. It's pressed in half with a nice crisp edge, and it's placed right along what would be the bottom of our area. We're going to place the top over it, and we're going to keep all our seam allowances exactly on the same level. Now, this is an education in pinning. We want to pin going across with our head sticking out, because that way, depending on which side you're going to be stitching on, you can always see the pins, and you never want to stitch over them. That can mess up the timing on your machine. But take a tiny little pick right where the seam allowance would be, and in this case it's at the 3/8. So my pins are right at the 3/8 marking. When you go to stitch, stitch to your pin, pull your pin out, and continue stitching. But this way, with all the raw edges, your piping will be exactly the width that it needs to be when you press this open. Here is our stitching line, all our raw edges. I've just clipped it here so I could serge portion of it. This way all the raw edges are serged together, clean finished. I've serged about half of that seam allowance off. Here is the piping on the front edge, and that is what the black section was, put in the little vest from Artist in Motion. That particular vest, if I just had the red bottom and the E-cut top without any line of demarcation, it just wasn't that special. That's why I put the flat piping in. Flat piping can go any place. All you have to do is cut the fabric apart, insert your 5/8 inch, and put the flat piping in it.